Welcome, I hope your coffee is warm. Today we're explaining adventures. So adventures basically are a double-sided card, but you can choose to play both sides. For example, Heart's Desire, which for 1 mana lets you create a 1/1, can then turn into Love-Struck Beast, which is a 3 mana 5/5 that you can play after it. Now, adventures have a very fun mechanic where you can choose 1, 2, or maybe if you think about it, 3 ways to play your card. So this is a very interesting design space. One option is that you play the adventure, the actual card gets exiled, and then you play the exiled card. You could also just play the adventure side of the card, or you could just play the permanent side of the card. Now, there is one point to note. Once you have played the permanent side of the card, you cannot play the adventure anymore. So it doesn't say on the card or anything, but you have to read it like this. So Heart's Desire, again the same example, says create a 1/1 white human creature token, then exile this card. You may cast the creature later from exile. The other side, the Love-Struck Beast, doesn't have this clause, so you can't play the adventure later. Now, there is an interesting thing about Love-Struck Beast, because Love-Struck Beast is a 5/5 for 3 mana, seems too good, but there's a downside. It says it can't attack unless you control a 1/1 creature. Interestingly, Heart's Desire creates a 1/1 creature. There are 2 things that are very interesting to me here. One is the mechanical side, which tells us that you get to create the thing you need for the other thing. So you get to create the 1/1 which you need for the 5/5 to be able to attack. And I think it's very interesting that this offers a very flavorful card, because this love-stricken beast gets to go on an adventure to find his heart's desire, and then he gets to do what he wants. He gets to attack. He stops being petrified by his lack of love, the thing he misses. So this is actually a very beautiful story on a seemingly simple card. And that's what adventures are about. I'll explain more about the adventures, their lore, and what you can do with them, together with some strategies that are great with these types of cards, and we'll dive into the commanders that work great with the mechanic. So a lot to unpack. I hope you already got your explanation if you were just looking for that, and otherwise, enjoy. So why are adventures so strong? Well, anything that gives you flexibility is a strong thing. And as I said, adventure cards can be played in 3 different ways, and often even more. But we'll get into that later. I think the flexibility is the most strong part here, but also the 2 parts of the card can work really well together. Let's look at another example. Lupari's Shield and Carvanista, the Loyal Lupari. Bit of a thing you might not like, but anyways, Lupari's Shield says it's a sorcery and it protects the humans you control. You gain indestructible until your next turn. This means that you could play this in order to be able to attack with all of your humans and deal a bunch of damage. And then later you can play a 5 mana 5/5 with Vigilance, Trample, Haste, and whenever it attacks, put a +1 counter on each human you control. In a mixed deck with humans and non-humans, not pointing to a certain kind of deck necessarily, this would be really strong because you have 2 plus sides on a card. When you're building your deck, you need cards that do multiple things in order to fit more cards into there. If you, for example, need a protection spell and you need a thing that can later in the game grow your creatures to be stronger, then this card can do both. And that flexibility is really strong, because then you have some space to do some other things that might be fun to you or that are really strong but maybe a little bit more niche. Let's look at some of the cards that really strengthen adventure decks. First of all, we have Edgewall Innkeeper, I think the most famous one, and really telling of the flavor and mechanics of adventures. This is just a 1 mana 1/1, could be played as a 1/1 for the Lovestruck Beast, but more importantly, whenever you cast a creature side of an adventure, you draw a card. So this works with just one side of the adventures, but is already really strong, and it's very flavorful because the Edgewall Inn is the place where heroes go to after they have completed an adventure, to talk about it, maybe brag about it a little bit. And that's really flavorful because they've just completed their adventures. Maybe they haven't in the game, but then when they come to the inn, you get to draw a card. There is another side of this, which is the Edgewall Inn, which has been added later in the Wilds of Eldraine set. And it is a land, it is the place you actually go, and it shows us that the Edgewall Inn was actually made on a tree. That's already pretty amazing in the way that it is built right here. And you can pay 3 mana, tap it, so basically 4 mana, to return target card that has an adventure from your graveyard to your hand. So that's just a bonus. Then we have the Lucky Clover, a 2 mana artifact. Again, an uncommon, so the core cards here really shouldn't get too expensive. This card says whenever you cast an adventure, instant or sorcery spell, copy it, you may choose new cards for the copy. I would say really strong because copying anything is really strong. And we have the Canceller of Tales. This is a little bit less strong because it's 4 mana and on a creature, but you do get the flying creature on top of it. It says whenever you cast an adventure spell, you may copy it again. Now that means that you get to copy and you get to copy, and that is even stronger, as you might imagine, because you're only paying once and you get 2 extra spells. So those are the things that make this mechanic stronger, and I think the focus on doubling the cards is a really strong one, because here we get to see how just that small adventure gets that much extra bite. Let's look at the lore of adventures. The adventure cards came from Throne of Eldraine. The world of Eldraine is all about adventurers, about going on quests, and hopefully about returning as a creature. Some key cards that have played great roles in Standard and other formats are, for example, the Fae of Wishes and their adventure sorcery Granted. This is a very strong spell in control decks because Granted says you may choose a non-creature card you own from outside the game, reveal it and put it into your hand, meaning you can get the exact answer you need to any situation. Then you can play Fae of Witches, which is just a 2 mana flying 1/4, which isn't too useful yet. But for 2 mana you can then discard 2 cards to return Fae of Wishes to its owner's hand, and you can get another wish granted. Now the flavor here is of course that you can get a wish granted by the Fae. Then the Fae will come to help you maybe later as a creature, but they're not helping you for free, they expect something in return. And what you give them in return is the 2 cards that you discard in order to return Fae of Wishes to wherever they live. And then you're rid of them, they're in your hand in this case. And maybe later you feel like you need another wish, you can get it granted, but then maybe later they will come to collect their 2 cards again. So you're getting 1 card, 1 wish, but you're losing 2. And often that is portrayed in stories as well as the saying that you should be careful with what you're wishing for. Another great card was the Giant Killer, mostly in draft, but I think this flavor is really cool too. It shows us the human that is chopping down the beanstalks, and it says, what size advantage, they never even see me coming. because he's small. Small things can kill big things, and that's exactly what his adventure says. For 3 mana you have the Chop Down adventure, which says destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. I think what's fun here is that the flavor text of the creature side really explains the adventure. So there is an additional layer of complexity to this flavor on the card. Then there's the Murderous Rider, which is another card that keeps returning. I think that's a really interesting part of adventures. The fact that you can get them back and then play their adventure sides again, then play them as a creature again. In this case, we have the Murderous Rider, which says when it dies, you put it on the bottom of its owner's library. So eventually it will return. This is really flavorful for a card from Eldraine that is black, because their castle, their faction is all about perseverance, as we will see a bit later as well. And returning every time indefinitely is definitely perseverance. When you get the Murderous Rider back in your hand, eventually you can play the adventure side again, and it's not bad. It's a murder card that makes you lose 2 life. Swift End says 3 mana destroy target creature or planeswalker and you lose 2 life. 2 life that you can get back with the Murderous Rider because it has lifelink and 2 power. So it really works well together, and it offers a really nice design space, I would say. Beanstalk Giant is another great card. It's very simple, you would say. For 3 mana you get to search your library for a land card, and then for 7 mana, way later, you get to play a big creature. Now this is interesting because the adventure part is Fertile Footsteps, meaning that you get to grow your amounts of lands. You get more forests and you have more luscious space to work with to eventually house your Beanstalk Giant, which will then maybe come to live in your town. Now with other cards you can turn that power into new lands, and that would be really flavorful as well. It's a dream, but that's how adventures maybe are supposed to be. There are many more examples from this set, but I think those are the most important ones to me. Let's move on to another set that uses adventures really well. It's the Wilds of Eldraine, so it's the returning set, and there are many cards here with adventures, many that have a connection to Spells Matter, because of course the instant side adds a lot to Spells Matter decks, but often you also need some creatures in there, and an adventure card is an instant or sorcery, and it can be a creature. But in this set they have shown us that adventure cards can also lead into enchantments, some really cool ones in fact, because Eldraine is all about 5 human factions that all have their own virtue, that they really care for. Red has the virtue of courage, blue has the virtue of knowledge, white has the virtue of loyalty, black has the virtue of persistence, and green has the virtue of strength. And all of those virtues have gotten an enchantment side and an adventure side, because on Eldraine you don't really get that virtue, you really have to work for it. You have to show the magical artifacts of the land that you embody that virtue. And let's look at all of them, because I think they are all really interesting. Now, all of them show, the adventure sides do, the name of the faction. So the Embereth Blaze, for example, which is a 2 mana instant that deals 2 damage to any target, showing us that we need to deal damage basically to ourselves. In this case, of course, you will deal damage to your opponents, but that's what it means. You need to step through that fire, show that you are not afraid of it, and then you will get the virtue of courage. A 5 mana enchantment that says whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, you may exile that many cards from the top of your library and you may play those cards this turn. Meaning you can really storm off with a direct damage deck. A really interesting card, I would say, and that is really focused as well. And here we have again that 2-sided part that we miss from a lot of cards that we really need. This is a direct damage spell and a card that synergizes with direct damage. Adventures can really do the thing where they work well with themselves. Next up is the Virtue of Knowledge, the blue one. It is the card from Ventress, land, a faction that really cares about knowledge. It really cares about you finding it, and it really needs you to share it with their people. The adventure side is Ventress Visions. You pay 2 mana to copy an activated or triggered ability, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Meaning that when you find a piece of knowledge, you get to share it with the mirror, with Ventress, and it gets to add it onto its own knowledge. So knowledge is really exponential. Then for 5 mana you get the Virtue of Knowledge. Once you have shown that you can see the visions, you get the Virtue of Knowledge, and for 5 mana, if a permanent entering the battlefield causes the triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. Now this just shows twice the same effect, but I think that's really interesting because once you have shown that you have knowledge, you can use the whole library of knowledge from Ventress, and I think this really shows how knowledge doesn't really go to waste. You just add it on top of the knowledge that's already there. The white one is Virtue of Loyalty and the Ardenvale Fealty, which is a 2 mana instant that creates a 2/2 knight with vigilance. White cards often are just about creating more creatures, but in this case, you're not really making your own knight, you are showing that you can swear fealty, you can be loyal to a knight. And once you have shown you have been loyal to that knight for a long time, in Ardenvale you get, well, basically you've shown that you are loyal. You have the Virtue of Loyalty, and that means that at the beginning of your end step you put a +1 counter on each creature you control and you untap those creatures. The knight had vigilance, remember that a little bit. You get to grow all of your creatures with +1 counters because you inspire them with your loyalty. A great leader in Ardenvale doesn't really care about only himself. He cares about all the little creatures on his side of the battlefield and wants them to grow stronger. He does this with his loyalty. And then you get to untap those creatures. You keep them vigilant because you want them to protect the realm. You teach them. You show by example. And that is the Virtue of Loyalty. Then we have the Virtue of Persistence, the black one. It is really expensive because you need to go the long game for the Lock-Twain virtue. Lock-Twain Scorn says target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn and you gain 2 life. This shows us how Lock-Twain is really about draining the power from many to strengthen some. So you drain the power from a creature to strengthen, in this case, yourself. But the flavor is you get to sacrifice a piece of yourself for the good of your leader, basically. Then once you've shown that you can persist through getting drained, you get the Virtue of Persistence. It's a 7 mana enchantment, really hard to get, but at the beginning of your upkeep, you put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, showing us the grim side of Lock-Twain, where people get resurrected just to get drained again. And lastly, there's the Virtue of Strength, where you basically show that you are strong enough to go through a hedge maze that's full of trees that you need to cut through. Its adventure side is Garenbrick Grove, returning a creature card or land card from your graveyard to your hand. Not really that strong, but it's all about showing the strength to keep on going even though you want to give up. And then once you've shown you can get through the maze, you will get the Virtue of Strength, which says if you tap a basic land for mana, it reduces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So great abilities and really a way to get into those adventures and play with them and become efficient with them as well. Let's look at some legends that have to do with adventures. The most important one, I would say, is Kellan. Kellan keeps on returning and often, well, all of the time until this point, has been working with adventures, really showing us that probably we will return. And why I'm return to Eldraine or adventures in some way, and why I'm saying this is because Kellan is basically going through the hero's journey. His first card is Kellan the Fey-Blooded and Birthright Boon, which are a combination of cards where the adventure side is the Birthright Boon. It's really showing how Kellan is called to adventure. He learns about the fact that he is a fairy. He learns about his magic. You get to search your library for an aura or equipment card, which is him finding his weapons. And then you get to play Kellan the Fey-Blooded, which is a double striking 2/2 that strengthens your other creatures. Kellan here is really about strengthening all of his friends, basically, with the auras and equipments that you get to attach to Kellan. This is the call to adventure. Kellan now wants to go on a big adventure, and that's why he works really well with adventures at this point. Then he gets some adversity. He's crossing the threshold, he's planeswalking, sort of, because he can go through the omen paths. So he is journeying on. Now, this really is on the nose with the fact that Kellan is going on a journey, on an adventure, and his cards all work with adventures. This adventure says you create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. Now this is foreshadowing as well, because on Thunder Junction, Kellan goes on to map the whole world. But okay. Kellan the Daring Adventurer himself is again a small creature. And it says when he attacks, you reveal the top card of your library, and if it's a creature with mana value 3 or less, you put it into your hand. So basically, you sometimes draw a card. Kellan is now through the threshold. He is going on an adventure, quite literally. And then he gets to go through some trials and tribulations. Kellan is now a prodigy on Ravnica that really is just curious about everything, and that gets him into a lot of trouble. Kellan in this card is tailing a suspect, which is the adventure side, which means you investigate and you may play an additional land this turn. Also really showing us how Kellan is really able to work with the mechanics of the set, because he can be a sorcery or instant. Kellan, the creature side, is a flying vigilance 3/4. He has grown a lot and has shown to be able to use a lot of colors as well. And he says whenever he attacks, destroy up to 1 artifact, and if you control the permanent, draw a card. Showing us how he can sacrifice a clue and draw a card. So basically he can use the clue for you without you having to pay the 2 mana. Kellan is really showing that from every plane he is learning a lot, and his traveling the world really enables him to get into his own and to become a true hero. Now this is where we sort of leave Kellan for a bit, and then he returns on Thunder Junction, which is to me the revelation, which is where he finds out that more about his father and who he is, and that he doesn't really agree with the things he does. And now we get to wait for the transformation, where I think Kellan will learn to be the master of 2 worlds, of the Fey realm and the human realm. Then he might return home, which will mean that he goes back to Eldraine, I think. And then we see him as maybe a sort of evil villain, is what I'm guessing. So a lot more about adventures to come, and they will definitely return, because Kellan's hero's journey is definitely not over yet. There are 3 important commanders for adventures, and one of them is again Kellan. Kellan the Kid is the card from Thunder Junction, which is green, white and blue. So, well, watch my color video for this, but green really helps you ramp and blue really helps you draw a lot of cards. It's a bit controlling and it works really well with specific answers to things, this color combination. It wants you to work with a combination of creatures and spells, and therefore I think green, white and blue are perfect for adventures, because it does exactly that. Now, Kellan the Kid is a flying lifelink 3/3, so okay for swinging with some damage. That says whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, which could be an adventure, you may cast a permanent spell with equal or lesser mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. If you don't, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So one way you can play this is playing a lot of adventure cards, ramping out your lands, and perhaps easily playing the creature sides of your adventures as well. But that means you are getting through your creatures a little bit too fast. So the fact that your adventures usually are lesser costed does mean that you have not a lot of value to go by, but there are some of the cards that are more expensive, like the Virtues that cost, for example, 5 for the white one and 7 for the green one, that can be really strong with this ability, getting you some big creatures onto the battlefield as well, or permanents, so it could be something else as well. Next up is Belluna the Grand Squall from Wilds of Eldraine. This card is green, blue and red, so ditching the white, getting red, not really important colors I would say necessarily. Belluna is an adventure card. It is Seek Thrills. It's a 5 mana instant adventure that says mill 7 cards, then put all cards that have adventures into your hand, well, from among the milled cards. That means that you get a lot of card draw whenever you play that adventure side, and then for 3 mana, which is a great cost for a 3 color commander, you get to play a 4/4 trample that says permanent spells you cast that have an adventure cost, cost 1 less to cast. That means that it's easier to cast all the spells that you've drawn, and this really shows us the power of Simic basically. But still works with adventures, so if you like the flavor, this is, I think, a great card to play. And we have Gorion, the Wise Mentor. This isn't from Eldraine, this is from Commander Legends, the Battle for Baldur's Gate. And it's again in Kellan's colors, green, white and blue. It's a vigilance creature that says whenever you cast an adventure spell, you may copy it. So now there are 3 ways to copy your adventure spells, and that really strengthens the point that adventure spells are meant to be copied. Now, to conclude, I think that adventures will return a lot. It has a really wide design space that is really interesting to me, at least, because the 2 sides can work that well together. We have seen different ways of wizards making cards that have 2 sides, double-faced cards. We have the room cards. We have predict, foretell. So there are many ways in which they are trying to make cards like this, but I think adventure spells just nailed it so well, and the flavor is, let's say, out of this world. I think there will be a lot more support for it, and maybe some interesting commanders as well, because I think Kellan has a lot of potential in fulfilling his hero's journey. So let me know your predictions, or if you're from the future, let me know what happened. And have a nice day. Thank you for watching. Bye.